Hello, I'm Stevie Thurston and welcome once again to The Wounded Man. In this episode we're going to have a quick review of a book which I think, if you're into historical European martial arts and medieval martial arts and medieval trauma and trying to make some ties between the things, I think this book's kind of key. It is Blood Red Roses, which is the excavation of the masquerade from the Battle of Towton, 1461, part of the Wars of the Roses. They found a masquerade part of the excavation, and this book kind of goes through it. I think it's a pretty good primer. It gives a brief overview of the excavation, the techniques that we used to excavate it. It is an old book. It's 20 years old now, near enough. So the methods that they talk about in excavation have been superseded. They were top-notch at the time, but technology's moved on. There's much more use of GPS, total stations. We also use things like photogrammetry and things for complex sites because there were multiple layers of remains, and they were quite tightly packed in, so there was ways we can do things now which are a bit different. On top of that, it gives you a brief overview of how they assess the remains and that kind of thing as well. And also, if you're going to keep following me or you go and do your own research into sharp force trauma, there are some key names that will continuously crop up, which Towton itself will continuously crop up in anything that you read when you start looking at battlefield trauma or sharp force trauma or medieval weapons trauma. Those names are Tim Sutherland, who's become kind of the expert on battlefield sites and the archaeology of battlefields. So he's produced, and you'll find him cropping up all the time in stuff that you do. Anthea Boylston is another one. She's sort of the major osteoarchaeologist, and then there's Malin Holst as well. And Malin's an osteoarchaeologist who's been doing a lot of work in Towton. She's and will crop up. We'll be reading quite a few of her papers as we continue along. So they're sort of the key names. Malin's now like one of the experts, and as I say, it should be cropping up all the time. Beyond that, there's a section by John Waller, who's looking at the weapons and things, so we get a few discussions about the type of weaponry that was used in that period. So if you're not particularly familiar with it, it's good in that way as well. There's also a bit of discussion about the battle and what occurred in the battle and what led up to potentially causing this mass grave. And that's where I kind of start to vary from it. But some good stuff in there by John Waller as well. As I say, there's other stuff going in there. But what for me is perhaps one of the most major useful aspects of this book is the case studies at the back, where they actually give us all the details about the trauma that happens, with sketches and photographs. As I say, it is quite old, so the picture quality isn't great. I'm going to have a quick chat about them in a second, so I've lifted some off and you'll see what I mean. But there are some good sketches in there. The key one possibly to start off with is this one, which shows actually all the sharp force trauma on a simple selection of diagrams, distributing all the their perimortem blade wounds. This is really quite useful. You can kind of see how they got to some of their conclusions, in terms of, you can see there's masses of wounds in the back of the head, with much fewer wounds towards the front of the head. And this is where I personally vary from the interpretation. One of the key features of Towton, as you'll find if you ever do buy the book, and I would recommend buying it, is that basically there was a rout, and we know there was a rout, and we know that lots of people were killed during the rout, and therefore people have sort of proposed that the wounds that are occurring and that we're finding in the remains are caused by attacking people from behind. As they're running away, people running up behind them and attacking them from behind, and hence we see all these wounds coming in towards the back of the skull. However, if you've ever done any martial arts, you'll notice, particularly bladed, sword blade stuff, if you're striking somebody face to face, you don't hit them in the front of the face, you hit them at the sides, the parietals, which is what we're seeing in here. Some of these wounds sort of coming through. The other thing that we sort of note as well is if I'm attacking you directly from behind, to create a wound like this, which runs in line with the shoulders, as it were, is not normal. You'd expect the blows to be coming in here and here, as I say, coming into the parietals and then coming into the occipital as it carries through. Where this is a very big wound, chopped straight through. You've got the radiating fractures coming through here. So we're seeing something quite different. And as I say, this is one of the bits that I've lifted from the book. Here we've got another one. Again, another diagram. We've got a series of wounds coming in at the back of the head, right onto the top of the back of the head. Not at the very top, but round to the back. Again, 3 wounds, probably all caused relatively close succession. Why we get 3 and why the different angles is obviously something we'd have to look into in a lot more depth, and I won't cover here. But it shows this idea that realistically this isn't something that would happen if you're attacking a man from behind. So as well as the diagrams and the drawings that are in there, there are also some photographs of the specific parts of the trauma. Again, I've altered these and enhanced them a little bit and fiddled with them so that sort of stand out better. Here we've got a very large wound coming through. That's perhaps something we would expect to see if we were attacking them directly from behind. But we have this wound coming through here. And when we look at this, again, we've got a radiating fracture. We've got another radiating fracture here. There's a part of a radiating fracture here. We've got more radiating fractures coming up there. And what this tells us is that this horizontal wound occurred prior to this wound. So it wasn't that he was attacked from behind and then another shot was taken as he was falling or anything. This happens first. We've got no radiating fractures. There's one come through here. But this big wound coming through here isn't creating radiating fractures, and you wouldn't expect it to. There's perhaps been a radiating fracture come up here, which has then removed this section of bone. But if this bone has already been broken and damaged, it's floating and it doesn't offer the same resistance, so it doesn't get the same breakage. So again, gives you just an interesting insight. Again, it does have some really interesting bits in here, and it is worth, because these bits aren't always covered in a lot of depth in any sort of documentaries or investigations of it, because they're difficult to explain, so you get quite superficial coverage of it. But here we've got several wounds at the top, and then we've got this series of horizontal minor chopping blows coming in along, and this is down this side of the head here. It creates quite interesting stuff. And as I say, the advantage of it, if you do get something like this, it's a bit of a coffee table book. It's not full on archaeology, so if you're not an archaeologist, you're still going to be able to read it and understand. But for the martial artists out there, to be able to go in at the back and look at the photographs, which are better quality when you sort of see them in the flesh, although they are quite small, you can start to look for your own interpretations of what's going on, rather than just believing they were attacked from behind. There's wounds to the back of the head, they were attacked from behind, it must have been part of the route. It may have been part of the route. I think it tells us something else, and I'll come to that later on in a different video, because I've got some theories on how that happens, and I did my undergraduate dissertation looking at sharp force trauma patterns of historical fight manuals, and it was a statistical analysis, so I was categorising where blows were coming in from and where they were hitting on the body, and then I compared it to the Towton masquerade, so I'll be coming back to that later on. But yes, back to the book. It's definitely worth having. It's a fun little read. It's nice to know that archaeology can be accessible, so the more people who buy it, the more people know that archaeology can be accessible, the more books like this will start to appear, which is better for all of us. But it's the only one that I'm going to suggest you actually go out and buy. From here on in, I'm pretty much going to be looking at academic journal articles that have been published online, and I'm going to try and keep it and focus primarily on pieces of work that are freely available, so that anybody can access them, and they're not hidden behind a paywall and you take my word for it, you can go through and read it yourself. But as I said, Blood Red Roses, definitely worth reading. Thank you for listening, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Bye bye.